Hello and welcome to Question Quick Clips. My name is Dr. Lina Majdalany, and today I'm going to be going over a question on identifying a primary verbal operant. The purpose of these quick clips is to give you some tools for tackling and breaking down questions, as well as helping you analyze your errors. So let's get started. So here you'll notice I only listed the question and left out the answer options. This was done on purpose to demonstrate one of my favorite ways to tackle a question, which is to try and get the answer before you see the options. So let's tackle this one. If Emmy is the behavior, which of the following is a tact? Before I even look at those answer choices, I want to try and identify a category or content area I'm going to be thinking in, which appears to be verbal operants in this case, because I'm seeing the word tact. A tact is a primary verbal operant. Next, think about what you have learned already about a tact, or even the grand category of verbal operants. Identifying verbal operants is not about the verbal response by itself, but rather the entire three-term contingency. We want to not only identify the behavior, but also the antecedent and consequence that evoke and maintain that response. So there are questions I want to ask myself first. 1. What is the antecedent that evokes a tact? Hopefully you're saying a non-verbal stimulus, something like an object, a sound, a smell, maybe the lighting in the room. Second question is, what's the consequence that maintains the tact? Hopefully you're thinking a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Some might say social consequences, such as praise or a comment back. So again, when identifying a verbal operant, we have to consider the entire three-term contingency, all of it. Another important part of identifying verbal operants is that you must always identify the behavior as well, because it is the behavior whose behavior falls in that B part of the ABC contingency. Now, in this case, the behavior is identified for us as Emmy, so that part's very clear. Let's go ahead and take a look at the answer choices. So here are the answer choices. I won't read them all right now because we're going to go through them one by one. But to reiterate the mission, we are looking for an answer choice that includes a non-verbal SD as the antecedent and a generalized conditioned reinforcer as the consequence. Before I read this first answer choice, let me tell you about another really helpful and useful tactic of mine, which is to identify what the distractors are examples of. I do this for two reasons. One, this helps boost my confidence when I finally pinpoint the correct answer. And two, it helps me eliminate answer choices. So that's part of my test taking process. Assumingly the distractors are going to be examples of other verbal operants, that's a safe assumption here, but it's possible that they're not. The distractors may be examples of other items that we can or can't easily identify. And that's okay. It's just something that you can look out for. Okay, the first answer choice is this. Emmy cannot find her doll anywhere. Emmy asks, "Where is my doll?" And mom responds with, "It's on your bed." Let's go through some of those questions you can ask yourself that I mentioned earlier. So the first question is, who is the behavior? We know that's Emmy. What is the verbal response? In this answer choice, Emmy says, "Where is my doll?" What evoked that response? In this case, it seems like she can't find her doll. So I might say this is an EO. There's a missing item. And the last question is related to the consequence, which is what stimulus followed that response? And in this case, the information, the specific consequence, right? Mom says it's on your bed. So that's the information functions as the consequence in this case. Remember, a tact is evoked by a non-verbal SD, not an EO, and the consequence is not specified in the response itself. It would be a generalized conditioned reinforcer. In this answer choice, we have a specific consequence, and we have an EO. So this is an example of a man, not a tact, and we can confidently eliminate it. Here is the next answer choice. Emmy's teacher asks her what her favorite toy is. Emmy responds with, "My doll." So let's go through that same process. Who is the behavior? Emmy. What's the verbal response? My doll. What evoked that response? The teacher asking a question, which would make it a verbal SD. What stimulus followed that response? It wasn't specified, and that's okay. We get enough information from the antecedent to help us answer this question. So remember, a tact is evoked by a nonverbal SD, and in this case, we have a verbal SD. So it's not a tact, but let's go ahead and figure out what it is. The verbal stimulus is the question, what's your favorite toy? The verbal response is my doll. And we'll just throw in a generalized condition reinforcer there to keep the three-term contingency together. More importantly, the verbal stimulus has no point-to-point correspondence with that verbal response. So I can identify this one as an intraverbal, and then I can confidently eliminate it. Here's the third answer choice. Seeing her doll, Emmy said, my doll. Mom said, yay, you found it. So let's go through that same process. The behavior we know is Emmy. What is the verbal response? She says, my doll. What evoked that response? The doll itself. So that is an example of a nonverbal SD. And the stimulus that followed that consequence was her mom saying, yay, you found it. So this one is promising, right? It matches the necessary antecedent and consequence requirements. So we won't eliminate it, but we still want to analyze that last answer choice in the same way. We made it to the final answer choice. Emmy sees the word doll written in a magazine and reads that word, doll. Let's go through that process. Who's the behavior? Emmy. What's the verbal response? Saying doll. What evoked that response? Seeing the written word, which is a verbal SD. What stimulus followed that response? In other words, what's the consequence? Well, we don't know. It's not specified. And again, it's not a big deal because the antecedent tells us a lot about the primary verbal operants. So remember, a tact is evoked by a non-verbal SD, and in this case, we have a verbal stimulus. That's the antecedent. So it's not a tact, but what is it? Well, the verbal SD here, which is the written word doll, the verbal response, which is her saying doll. So there's no formal similarity between that verbal stimulus and the verbal response, but there is point-to-point correspondence. Doll, doll. Written word doll, saying the word doll. So by definition, that makes this a codic, and I can confidently eliminate it. So I'm left with answer choice C as the correct answer. Hopefully that quick analysis helps you think about multiple choice questions differently and critically. Lastly, I want to leave you with some advice for analyzing your errors in this specific area. If you struggled with this item, you may be having trouble identifying primary verbal operants. If that's the case, you'll want to review B19 from the 6th edition TCO. You may also be struggling if you are too focused on the behavior. Don't forget that you have to analyze the entire three-term contingency, not just the behavior when identifying verbal operants. Pinpoint the antecedent and the consequence, just like we did in this example. Some strategies you can use to address this error include simply grabbing a piece of paper whenever you're trying to answer multiple choice questions related to verbal operants and writing out that three-term contingency. Then you can pull information from the question to fill in the blanks. So this allows you to really focus on all three components. Lastly, a good and I think fun activity is to write out your own unique examples from your immediate environment. This should be pretty easy because we're surrounded by verbal behavior. You could pick someone in your house as a behavior or maybe even choose yourself. But for example, if I'm the behavior and my neighbor asks me to let her dog out at lunch and I say yes, this is an example of an intraverbal. Why? Because there's no point-to-point correspondence between the verbal SD, can you let my dog out, and my verbal response, yes. I can't leave you without some presents. So here I have listed extremely helpful resources that we have to help you out in your preparation to master this material. So you can take the supplemental quiz that goes along with this quick clip. You can study to fluency using SAF Med cards. You can check out our cheat sheets, which are also known as easy sheets. And don't forget to join our Boost Study and Support group on Facebook. You can get all of these resources by clicking on the links in the description box below. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this walkthrough gave you new ways to think critically about tackling multiple choice questions. Remember, mastering them takes both practice and strategy. So keep applying what you've learned and success will follow. Happy studying!